Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life podcast. I hope everybody out there is having a beautiful day. In our lives, there's so much that we can be caught up about, or we can kind of get caught in the mix a little bit, but there's so much to be thankful for. And one of the things I want everyone to be thankful for is their own origin story. I want people to be thankful that there's people out there that have been through things before that you may be coming up to. There's a great quote that says, most people in life are either going into a storm, they're in a storm, or they're coming out of a storm. And I'm going to introduce you today to our friend of the show, Jake Wood, who's been in all of those positions. And I think he's really fit to tell us about the adventure he's been on. And I think everyone can pull some nuggets of truth out of these adventures. So Jake Wood, he lives his life with so much passion, but there's a quote that he has called "Living Beyond the Brink," and I think his story sums that up. But before I pass, there's a lot I could say about him, but I'm going to dish it off because I want him to tell the story here. But I want to start with this one quote that really hit home for me, Jake, and that is, the moment right before you quit is usually the moment right before the miracle happens, man. How are you? How did you come up with that quote? What's going on there?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on here. Yeah, the quote is I didn't come up with the quote. It was
Right,
something that I had read. Like, being in sales my whole life, it was something of like, and you don't want
right.
to give up, right? You get told no the whole time, and it was something where it was like, usually, and there's a lot of inspiring stories of like, usually it's, they're just ready to give up, and then all of a sudden, like a donor will come in and give them a bunch of money to start their business and whatnot.
Right.
And I just kept seeing that happen, right? Because I was like, I don't want to do that. But then you can push a little bit, further, right? Just hanging on, trying
Always.
again. Then all of a sudden it's like, wow, I'm so glad I did. That's when like that transformation happens. And so it was something that like really stuck with me because it was something I struggled with, right? I wanted to quit quite a bit.
Yeah, I think that is a point that we can really drive home. I think a lot of people really want to quit, and there's nothing worse than seeing that person who has quit because it feels like
Mhm.
part of them has died. And the truth is, everybody who's made it has probably been through those moments where they quit on themselves, and
Mhm.
it built a fire in them. Like the fire goes out, but then they build a new fire, and it builds back in a way and burns brighter than anything ever possible. And I think that's what your story does, Jake. And I was just hopeful. I first off, congratulations on all the new certificates you've gotten. Congratulations on all the people whom you have touched and helped become better and believe in themselves. I think that's amazing. But I like to start off with origin stories. And I think that you have a beautiful one. So I just want to turn it over to you. And you could start from wherever you think is a great starting path, but maybe you can just introduce a little bit of who you are and then start with your origin story.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm from a small coal mining town in eastern Utah, right? So my grandpa, he worked in the mine his whole life, retired. My dad, 20 plus years. My brother worked there. I worked there for about 6 months is all. Um, Insane experience. But I've been doing a lot of sales in my life, a lot of managing, a lot of leading. So I was always big into coaching. I played sports growing up, loved basketball. I'm a big basketball fan. So I had kind of wanted to be a coach that way, right? I loved working with people and just kind of life, like as we'll talk about, just we think we're gonna go one way, and then it's like, no, man, like this is, it's not gonna happen, right? So, um, but yeah, it all started right. I'm from a big family, right? A family of eight. I have four sisters and a brother. I am the fourth out of the six kids. Um, you know, I mean, it's kind of a typical large Mormon family, right? I grew up in a really religious home. The roots go way back to the beginning of the church, right? So my third great grandpa was Wilford Woodruff, who was the fourth president and prophet of the church,
Wow.
and so that entire line, right, the Woodruff side is, all of my uncles were all seminary teachers, a lot of strong faith, a lot of strong faith. Wonderful people. It's I was blessed. They all have six kids, so I have a ton of cousins, and they all have babies. It's insane. Uh, but yeah, that's kind of where um, I had kind of mentioned this earlier too. Is like I've told my story a little bit. Like a lot of people had known some of the things that have happened to me, but it wasn't until I'm not joking. It was about a month, maybe 2 months ago, really, when like that real healing experience came.
Mm,
And which is why it was like, when I met Kristen, it was like, okay, this is really fast. Um, just because of the fact that I had that, it was trauma, right? I didn't know I
right.
had trauma. I I was I think I lost you. Okay, so yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't realize that the trauma part of my life was even a thing because I grew up in such a loving family, right? Like I had both parents, right? I was loved. I had a lot of family, and I was just like I know a lot of people who have had a lot of horrible things happen, and that's trauma. But working with an amazing therapist, like honestly, it's really hard. I feel like it's difficult to find a good therapist, right? You go and sometimes it does damage, right? Going. Um, but her name is Amanda Mossing. It's actually her birthday. You can find her
Oh,
at
nice.
soul-feather.com. She's a beautiful, beautiful soul. But we were talking and a lot of a lot of emotions were coming up, right? Where it was, trauma, and Dr. Gabor Mate has talks
Right.
about it, right? Trauma is not what happens to you, right? Those are traumatic events. But trauma is what happens inside you. And so as we were going back through my childhood, right? Like that's when those things start coming, right? Like that's when the
Yeah.
the voice in our head, we call it our gremlin, right? In the course that I took, right, to get my certification, that's what we talked about. That gremlin's that voice in your head. It's, you don't belong here. You're not smart enough. Um, and that message usually comes when we're younger,
Right.
right? But it's there to protect us. And when we started talking about it, my gremlin had always been like I'm a bad person, right? Or that I didn't belong. And when we were going back and trying to go back as far as we could, right, to
Right.
see maybe where those things happened. Um, and I want to be clear too, is like I said, my parents, my family, all were the best people, right? It wasn't anything to do with them. They went through their childhood trauma. We all
Right.
go through it, right? Um, but I saw it happening where, I had a ton of energy as a kid. I could not stop talking, laughed all the time, right? Like I would get kicked out of every single class, right? Primary, like even at home, it was like it would be too much for my mom, right? Like, hey, go see grandma. So I'd have a grandma and I'd go annoy
Yeah.
her. Um, but as I was getting, kicked out of class or just kind of like it was just kind of confusing to me because I would get scared because then I was getting in trouble,
Right.
right? Because then it was like, okay, hey, you can't even be quiet, and that kind of goes with what Dr. Mate talks about too, is like it's suppressing who we are, right? Like those are natural emotions, right?
Right.
And to feel that, okay, if I act this way, that's bad. I'm not. I can't do that, right? And so there'd be those times, in sports, if I would make a mistake, I'd start crying in front of everybody because I made a mistake or I thought I was going to get yelled at, kind of thing.
Right.
And so, but then as we were going through that, that's when, with the church type stuff, where I started going back there, where I could see a lot of those messages being reinforced in that religious side of things, where again the church has blessed me so much in my life. I owe a lot
Sure.
of my growth to them. But there were certain things of, we didn't watch PG-13 movies. We could watch like Disney shows and animated scripture shows. And in those animated scripture movies, it was like, there's a story about the wicked king Noah, right? They call it Wicked King Noah. And, he got burned at the stake. And so it was that whole idea of if you're not living the commandments, you're a wicked person, right? You're a
Hmm.
bad person, right? So it's kind of that either or. And I could see that, right? So when I'm going to church and I'm getting kicked out of class, it kind of was like, like, that's where it was
Yeah.
that's where it was starting. Um, but I didn't know, and that's kind of where the confusing part is. Like as a kid, like you don't know that that's happening to you,
Right.
and so I kind of thought it was normal. You fast forward to when you're 12 years old, right? Adolescent years, um, this is where it really got difficult for me. Um, when you're going through, it's kind of a difficult part of the whole process, but I feel like it's important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, so the birds and the bees talk didn't really happen. What had happened was um, there was a talk given by a general authority that it was entitled "To Young Men Only," right?
Hmm.
And it was talking, and it later became a pamphlet which I received when I was 12. And in the pamphlet, it talks about, it compares the reproductive system to a little factory, right? And so, like the misuse of that factory, it can run its course, right? If you just let it alone, it'll run its course. It works just fine. But if you start to tamper with it, right? If you start to like do anything that during that age, which is normal behavior that I've
Right.
learned now, it's like it doesn't matter, like that stuff that's literally going to happen. Then there's serious consequences, right? And so when you think about it, it was talking about like if you give in once, like it's something that you can be tempted again and again, and you won't feel anything but depressed and guilty. It talks about
Wow.
that. And so, and I don't want to like just say it. So I did write down some things because I don't want to. A misconception is people that leave the church are angry at the church, and so I'm not angry at the
Right.
church. And so, um, but a part of it was it's like pray more, read more like in the scriptures, and sing a hymn. The signal of worthy manhood is self-control. If you misuse it, you will be worthy. Boys are to become men, masculine, manly men. Ultimately, to become husbands and fathers. No one is predestined to be to a perverted use of these powers. And by that
Mm.
time, I mean, those were natural things that had happened, but like in my mind, from that I am bad, like that shattered me because like I wanted to be good, right? Like
Yeah.
it wasn't like I was trying to misbehave in my classes. Like I really wanted to be good, and that was the same in church. And it killed me because at that age, you they have the sacrament, right? And then when you're
Right.
12 years old, you pass the sacrament to everybody. But if you make a mistake like that, then you're not able to, right? You don't have the Holy Ghost with you, right? So you have to sit out for a while. But if there's like 5 12-year-olds in that, the ward, and you're sitting out,
Right.
everybody, obviously everybody knows that, oh, okay, Jake had done something. And so then that's the thought in your head. It's like, okay, now everybody thinks I'm bad, right?
Yeah.
Going back to that, oh my gosh, I'm bad because, this is happening. And then you repent, you confess, and then after a certain amount of time you can bless the sacrament again until it happens again,
Mm.
right? So then it was kind of like it's like, okay, my family, I'm letting all of my family down, they see this, people in the ward see this,
Right.
and it was just really really hard to go through. And so especially because the first time that I had seen anything to do with pornography, right, was doing a fine. It was, I was 10 years old. I was like walking out in the hills in Brighton. I came across a magazine, and I felt so guilty. It felt like I had looked for it, right, and I didn't
Mm.
dare say anything,
Right.
because I didn't want to get in trouble. I didn't want to be bad. And like I think of it now, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's like I just want to hug
Yeah.
that person, that kid, right? Um, and so that was kind of my 12 to, let's say, throughout high school, right? I didn't drink, I didn't do any drugs
Right.
all through high school. Um, I didn't have a girlfriend because I was scared to death. I had no healthy idea of what relationships were
Yeah.
right, like the sexual type instances. And it was time for me to be at the age of going on a mission, a church mission.
Okay.
So I was going to be one of the first. My brother didn't serve a mission, right? He's older, and I was going to be the first, grandkid to
Yeah.
serve a mission. And so I was like, okay, yeah, this is awesome. But like during that couple month period of like getting out of high school and before you go on a mission, they tell you it's like to be extremely careful during that time because Satan doesn't want you to go on a mission, right? Satan is going to do everything in his power to make it so you don't go. And so
Mm.
it's like, don't be alone with a girl, a member of the opposite sex, just try to be, like have somebody with you, basically to watch you. And unfortunately, I had messed up before I left. And again, when I did, it felt like I could feel my soul just like screaming, like no, right? It was just so. As soon as it happened, right? It was just, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? But I didn't want to tell anybody because I wouldn't be able to go.
Yeah.
And I knew a lot of people who had done what I had done and even worse, and they still went on their mission, right? I was just like,
Right.
I'm going to do that.
Yeah, totally.
I'll be cool. Um, I lasted maybe about like a little like 2.5 weeks. They put me in a leadership position right off the bat, right? Over about eight or 10 missionaries. And I was constantly getting praised of how good of an example I was, how great of a leader I was. And inside I was just like, oh my, like, they have no idea. And I couldn't, I'm just like, I can't lie anymore. I didn't want to do that to the people. And I really, really wanted to be a great missionary, right? Like I followed all of the rules. I did everything that I could, trying to do so to make up for what you know,
Right.
not feeling worthy. So it was late at night. I called our district leader, who ended up calling the mission president. I confessed to them, and I was sent home from my mission. So in my mind, right, this is a whole nother thing of like, it's not what happens to us, it's what's happening within us, right? That's where the
Yeah.
trauma is.
Yep.
So in my mind, it's again like, oh my gosh, like I'm not worthy. When you have a big family, like the idea is, you know, in Latter-day Saint, like it's not we don't believe in hell, right? It's there's levels of the kingdoms, right? So celestial kingdom is the highest level, and you want to be there with your family.
Right.
And so you don't want to be left out of that because it's all about family, right? Everything is like, we don't want any empty chairs in
Yeah.
heaven. And I didn't want to be that empty chair. And so that mindset of like, oh my gosh, I'm screwing it up. I'm I'm going to be the one, left out, and I'm disappointing my mom, my dad, and that's my mind, right? Like my
Right.
mind is just continuous, right? A lot of energy, and so it's just eating at me,
Looping.
eating at me.
Yep.
So to stop that, I remember I came home. I went to my first party. It was out in the hills. I drank for the first time, and I enjoyed the confidence that I got from it. Right, I was talking. I wasn't thinking about how big of a piece of crap I was, and shortly after that, it's kind of crazy because I went from that to pain pills. I was offered some
Mm.
some pain pills, and um, I I started taking pain pills. I smoked weed for the first time, um, and I just, I mean, it numbed it, right? Like
Yeah.
I didn't have to think of anything, and so like, man, I'm just going to continue to do this. Um, at that time, though, OxyContin. So it was a time when like our little town just got destroyed by
Right.
OxyContin, and so I mean everybody was doing it. I started to sell some to support the habit. Like people would pay like $110 for one pill, right? And it was just
Wow.
ridiculously expensive, but it was because it's synthetic heroin, right? Like
Right. Yep.
and and so then once that becomes too expensive, right? Then you have heroin that's super cheap, right? And so then
Yeah.
that's where heroin comes into play, and there's a lot of people, overdosed, just a bad time. Um, but it wasn't like that was my drug of choice. I just didn't want to fail,
Right.
right? And so there was a point where I didn't have anything, and price is also it's a pretty it has a meth problem pretty bad, right? It's a small town. It's about an hour
Sure.
away from really anything. And I had known of an apartment complex down there that was known for having meth. And all of my friends really strong LDS, right? Best friends ever, but they had left on their mission. A lot of the ones that are close to my age, and none of them would have done that. So I just went by myself. It was like, I remember it was like 1 or 2 in the morning. I just drove down there. I saw a car that was parked on the side of the road and had some people in it. And in my mind, I was like, I bet they are.
Those are the guys.
I bet, yeah, those are the guys. So I just walked up to the car, knocked on their window, freaked them out a little bit.
That's
Because yeah,
awesome.
no idea who I am, but I was just like, hey, like, do you guys know where to get this? If you do, like, I'll buy everything. Like, because I don't know how to smoke it. I don't know how to do
Right.
anything. So I was like, I'll buy it if you guys will help me
Right.
smoke it. And they're like, all right, man, yeah, let's do it.
Jump in, bro. Welcome to
Yeah,
the family.
yeah, best friends, right? Immediately, just like,
Totally,
oh my
totally.
gosh, yeah. And so I'm like, okay, yeah. And we end up, it was like staying up for like 3, 4 days, just
It's a bender.
insane stuff happening where, because you kind of get like you hallucinate a little bit, right?
Yeah, of course.
There was a time we were at like a trailer park, some guy ran in, he had like a little knife and he's like, they're after me, they're after me. And I hadn't done anything yet, so I was still coherent. I'm like, who's after you? And it was like, but there wasn't anybody,
Mm-mm.
right? It
For
was
him,
just
there was.
for him, there was
There's might have been
absolutely.
5 guys looking for him.
Exactly. So that's kind of like, 3, 4 days, and then money runs out, meth's gone, they're
Mm,
no longer your friends,
yeah.
right? They're just people that are passed out. My conscious starts coming in,
Mm,
and I leave. I start walking home, right? It's about 4:30 or 5 in the morning, and I'm just walking, like just kind of like lost, right? Tired. And I see like a basement apartment light on. And I'm like, dude, maybe they have meth. Like that's my mindset of like,
yeah.
I'm gonna go I'm just gonna go
Maybe, why not?
knock on that random door and ask them if they have meth. So I walk over there and I knock on the door, and I'm like, I'm just out of it. And the kid that opens it, I recognize him. He was the kid that I knew from the college there. And he opens the door, and I look right by him, and him and his roommate. I look by him, and his roommate was sitting there at the table, and they had their scriptures open, like
Hmm.
they're having scripture study. And he looks at me, and he's like, Jake, and his name is actually Jake too, but he's like, Jake, and I couldn't say anything, right? I just saw the scriptures,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just kind of like, dude, what are you doing? Like, go home. It's like, go home, tell your parents, right? Like, you need help.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I walked home. They were sleeping. I just walked in the room and I told them that I needed help. And my parents are the most amazing people in the world.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're like, okay, yeah, let's get you some help. But we lived an hour away, right, through the canyon. And so we were calling a detox center because I was, not right mentally. I was just wanting to
Right.
end everything, right? Just like my life. And so he called somewhere and they said that they had a bed for me. We
Nice.
drive up there. And by the time we got up there, they're like, oh, I'm sorry, we filled the bed already. So then he had to drive me back home, an hour back through the canyon back home. We called somewhere else. They said that they have a bed for me. And so he drove up again and back. And finally, we did find a place where they kept the bed open. And I was
Mm-hmm.
able to get in. And I ended up going to rehab, which the church the church helped and paid for. And rehab
Yeah. That's
is
awesome.
so expensive,
Yeah.
right? Like so expensive. And because my parents have been so faithful, and just is like, no, we want you to help. We want to help. And so I was able to go to rehab immediately. Like I'm talking like 2 weeks later, I was playing at a softball tournament, and there was, I was playing in the outfield, and the ball was hit between me and the left fielder, and we didn't talk, we didn't communicate, right? So we're both running at it, and I dive for the ball, and he doesn't, and he's a big guy too, and I'm laid out, and my shoulder just drives right into his thigh. I just
Mm,
crunched. They all said they could just
mm,
hear it, clearing the dugouts and everything. So I
yeah.
shattered my clavicle. I broke a couple ribs on my left side, and when I kind of came to, like, it was a big gasp, right? Because I think it had like hit part of that lung, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like I was like, I think I broke my back. I think I broke my back. They're like, I don't know, man, you messed your shoulder up, because it was just, it
Yeah,
was just completely out. But because of that, I was right back on pain pills,
right.
right? Right back on pain pills, and a lot of pain pills. So I don't have a job. At this point too, I start getting crazy, right? Like I was going completely against the kind, loving Jake, right? I was just going like, I was big into um, rap music, gangster rap music.
Hmm.
I loved gangster rap music. It was like the furthest thing away from
Sure.
like the church, right? And so I was, I wanted to be. I thought I was a gangster, right? I was hanging out with people who I shouldn't have been hanging out with, but I just didn't want to feel it. So like all day I didn't have a job yet. So I'd be upstairs, and I'd go to my room and sniff a bunch of Percocet, come back up. It'd be all day, just back and forth. And, during this time, I was still, messing up on the immoral side of things. Right? I'm not going to church, I'm messing up that way. And, which literally was the whole, like, the morality part would be the thing that would just drive me to take more and more and more, just try to numb it. Because, like I said, as a kid, you learn that sexual sins, it's next to murder,
Mm.
right? So you're thinking, it's like, dude, I'm on that level, like, right? It's like I'm
Yeah.
on that level. And so just numbing, and I got a call from one of the church leaders, and they said they wanted to hold a disciplinary council for me, for my membership, right? It was, during those councils, you either get disfellowshipped, meaning that, you're still a member of the church, but you can't hold a calling, you can't pray, and things like that. Or you get excommunicated, where you lose all of your blessings. You lose the gift of the Holy Ghost. You lose, the priesthood. You lose all of those things. And I was like, dude, go ahead, have it. I don't care. Excommunicate me. I don't care.
Yeah.
Right? It was just like, do what you got to do. And I did not think I cared. I got a letter in the mail from them telling me that they had, held the council. And when I had read, it was like, dear brother Wood, the council had, come to a conclusion, and it said, you are no longer a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And oh my gosh, like, it hurt. Like, it
Yeah.
hurt really, really bad. But I didn't think I cared, like, at all, right? But like my inner Jake, my inner self was just like,
Yeah.
dude, was a killer.
Yeah.
Um, so that kind of, that's when I started getting all of my tattoos. That was kind of like a healing thing for me, right? Like,
Sure.
wounding. I needed to feel something. And so, I just got all sorts of tatted up. Um, then one of my buddies was going to North Carolina to sell security systems, right, for the summer. It's a big thing in Utah to go out and do that. And he asked me if I wanted to come out with him. And
Nice.
at that time, I was on a drug called Suboxone. Are you familiar with
I'm
that?
not familiar with that. No.
So it's a drug that they give, opiate people
Okay.
trying to come off of opiates, right?
Okay.
And so I'm on that. I'm not doing any opiates. So I'm doing pretty good. I get to North Carolina, and I was there probably about a month is all. And, I started smoking weed again. I made a mistake that, when like word was getting around the office, I was denying everything, but, one of the managers was like, hey, there's another office in Houston that needs somebody, and we're going to send you there. So I'm like, all right. So I fly home, and then I drive down to Houston, I don't have I don't have a doctor down there to get my Suboxone.
Okay.
And so I'm going through like heroin withdrawals, really
Mm,
just, the same kind of withdrawals
sure.
that you get. So I don't go out for the first 2 weeks. I don't go out and do any of like, the installations, security systems. I find somebody at the McDonald's who I thought looked like they smoked weed. They smoked weed. And so I ended up just like hanging out with them the whole time. There was one point where all of the sales reps had left, and for an incentive, the manager had put five $100 bills just pinned up there. So when I went to the office, I saw that. I saw nobody around. I took all $500 and went and got a tattoo. Um, so I was the only one not working. So of course it was like, hey, did you take the money? I'm like,
Yeah.
no, I didn't take the money. It's like, kind of the same thing. But then after that, they're like, hey, we're going to send you to another office it was called the Houston South office. So I get kicked out of that office as well. And when I got to that Houston South office, it was an office full of Canadians, which were the coolest, the nicest people in the world. But they were all clean cut. Some of them had their wives, their kids.
Mm,
And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is my family. Or they're all Mormons, right?
yeah.
I
Yeah.
know that they are. And so I felt at home, and I felt those thoughts of like I started to actually think about Mormonism again. I started to think about like my life.
Mm,
Um, I don't know if you're familiar with like the prodigal son story.
sure.
So it was one of my favorite animated scripture
Yeah.
movies as a kid. And it kind of like reminded me of myself. I'm like, oh, I had
Right.
all of this, I'm going to go on my own and then, go
Yeah.
with the world. Then
Yeah.
I lose everything. And a part in that movie, it shows the prodigal son, like it was when he was walking around, like he had lost everything, kind of like when I was on meth, just walking around, like didn't have anything, no friends.
Right.
And he started eating with the pigs, right? Just the slop in like he stopped, and he's like, what am I doing? He's like, even my father's hired servants are eating better than I am, right? Like I'll go work for my father. I'll go work and go back. And I immediately
Mm,
related that to me. I'm like, man, like look at my family. Like every single one of them are happy. They have kids. They have a life. And here I am getting kicked out of everywhere, sad, depressed, alone.
yeah.
I'm like, I want to go back, right?
Yeah.
So that decision was like that was the time where I'm like, okay, I'm going to work hard to get rebaptized. And I started to write in a journal. Like that day, I was planning on writing in the journal until I got baptized. And this part of my life was it kind of gets me going right now because
Yeah.
when I go back to the journal, like that's one of the more depressing parts for me to look back because I saw how sad, how hurt, how like
Mm,
desperate I was of like I don't have the Holy Ghost. Like how am I supposed to do this? I'm going to go at it alone. Like I can't pray, I can't even talk in church, right? If I were to go, like I can't participate. So then it's like if somebody like I'm worried the whole time, like, oh man, somebody's going to call on me. I'm going to have to say, I'm sorry, I can't participate, right? I'm
mm,
excommunicated. I can't participate. And my very first page, when I went back and looked at it, there was a book. It was from one of my at the time favorite prophets, right? Spencer W. Kimball. It's called The Miracle of Forgiveness. The very first thing I put in my journal, and it said, the person who is excommunicated loses his membership in the church and all attendant blessings. As an excommunicant, he's in a worse situation than he was before he joined the church. He has lost the Holy Ghost, his priesthood, his endowments, his sealings, his privileges, and his claim upon eternal life. This is about the saddest thing which could happen to an individual. Ah, better that he suffer poverty, persecution, sickness, and even death. Oh, so then it goes on. It's, as, not having any of those, it says, um, it is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God, and
mm,
especially already branded as an apostate or transgressor. And so when you think about it, like the way that my mind has already been thinking has already been killing myself inside of being the worst person in the world.
Yeah.
And then I read that it's better that I would, you know, better to die than be in the position that I'm in. Like that really, really hurt to go back and read that, because then the entire time was like, I just want to be an instrument in God's hands. And then I can help show people that, no matter what you've done, God will forgive you if, right? If
Yeah.
you do this thing. So it was that whole, like, that's the only way I'm going to be able to be an instrument in his hands. And then I would mess up, right? You'd have to, like, the rules to get back in the church was I had to be completely clean from drugs, from any immorality, masturbation, anything, pornography, for a full year. And I could not do it. And I would go, and then I'd mess up, and then I would get so depressed
Mm.
because I had messed up. And
Right.
then it would go
Right.
right back to drugs. And then I'm like, okay, what's the point? And each time it would just get worse and worse. But then I would have moments and experiences of like, no, dude, keep trying. Like,
Yep.
keep going. I had great people, friends and things like that. But I was working with a bishop, and I had moved in with a friend out of Price, right? I moved back to Price from Houston. Wasn't a good place for me. Moved out again, and I met with the bishop to work on, getting back in the church. And after talking to him about like some of the things I had done, he he looked at me and he said, well, I suggest, he's like, it would be smart of you to stay away from, any females, don't date any right now. He's like, but especially within our ward. And it was like, these are, I consider them to be my daughters type stuff. And like, it was like I was a predator, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And and so, like, when I'm thinking about it now, I'm like, what in the world? But when I read about it in my journal, I was like, yeah, that kind of hurt, but like he's right. Like, I'm not to be
Mm.
trusted. I was
Mm.
agreeing with it.
Man, that makes me sad.
So I'm agreeing with it. And that's just the constant, like, kind of battle of like, okay, you do deserve this. You don't deserve this. Like, it's not about like being loved for like who I was. It was like how I was. I had to. It's like, if I don't do this, I don't deserve the blessings. I'm not worthy for love. I'm not worthy for any of those other things. And so finally I kept making mistakes. I got to the point where, I went on another meth spree, and I did some things in my mind that I thought I wouldn't have ever done in my entire life. Didn't think I could come back from. And so I just was like, okay, I'm going to run away, right? I'm going to take everything in my car. I'm going to drive to California. I'll do whatever I have to do to get money, but like, I don't want to hurt my family anymore, because there'd be times where it's like Thanksgiving, I had overdosed one time, and I miraculously made my way to the hospital, like, by myself.
Mm-hmm.
And they put me in a detox center, and I had to call my mom that night. Like, it was early, and call and say, hey, I'm at a detox facility. I can't go to Thanksgiving, right?
Mm.
It'd be those things where it'd just be so many times, and I'm like, I don't want to hurt them anymore. I I don't. I'm just gonna go. I don't want, like, it's better. And we would talk on her bed and like argue, and of like how it's like it would be better for me if I committed suicide than to just keep hurting with. And I'm like, because don't you see that, like, I can't stop, right? That was one of the things that, like, I would cry and be like, why can't you stop? Like, I wanted to stop so bad. It didn't make any sense. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
understand addiction. It's like, what the hell are you doing, man? Like, just stop. And I couldn't. And it was just breaking my heart to have those late night calls of like, hey, I'm in a psych ward, or hey, I overdosed, kind of stuff. And so I put everything in my car, and I'm on the way. but I drive through Price, right?
Mhm.
And Price is just, it's a bunch of plateaus, right? It's like deserty and plateaus. And so there's, like a place that I'd go. I didn't go in the city. I just went and built a fire up on out in the hills, just trying to, it's like, okay, I'm going to do it, right? Like having that conversation of like,
Right.
man, this is just it's bad. But I ended up calling a friend and letting him know that I was there. And while we were talking, like it just, that voice came back again. It's like, go home.
Mm.
Like your parents, like go home. Your parents will still accept you. They still love you. And so I did. I went home. It was rainy. It was early in the morning. My dad opened the door, just hug, right? Just
Yeah.
open arms,
Yeah.
like, like, like welcome home, right?
Yeah.
And so, I was like, okay, I'm gonna try again. And I don't do very well like living with them, but at least I didn't run away, right?
Right.
I get put on a lot of, it was, Klonopin, like a lot of benzos,
Mm.
and then a lot of antidepressants, right? I was diagnosed with bipolar at the time
Mm.
because of all of these so-called like manic crazy
Right.
stages. And so it was just like I'm all all drugged out on those things, and I'm still just super super depressed.
Mm.
The benzos were really bad. I hated where I worked, and I just would take those and take those and take those. But then it got so bad. I was like, I need to check myself into rehab. Like I'm not going to tell anybody. I've got insurance with this company. Like I'm just going to go and check myself into rehab. But I had also taken it's called methadone. It's kind of similar to
Mm.
Suboxone,
Right.
um, as part of like the benzos. And because of that, I guess it was like a really like dangerous reaction. And a couple of the rehabs wouldn't take me, like my insurance and things. It wouldn't take me. And I found a rehab up in Ogden, Utah, where I live right up there now, but
Mhm.
they would. So I drove up there, completely just gone, messed up. And like on bananas, like on those things, you just don't remember anything,
Mm.
right? So I drive the scary canyon all, at night all by myself. I hadn't ever been to Ogden, but my aunt had lived there. But I start to see all of these city lights, and there was all these signs that said Ogden. And I didn't have a GPS at the time, and so I'm like, I have no idea where I'm at. And so I just called my aunt because she was pretty close with us too, and she was always one that just was cool, right? She was
Yeah.
80s rocks, like she was
Yeah.
like a little rebellious herself. But I told her about it, and I had never been to her house, but somehow I was able to just drive right there. She took me to the hospital. They sent me back home because I was going to get into the rehab. They're like, come back in the morning. And when I came back in the morning, the doctors were like just pissed. It's like, dude, like coming off of benzos, like there's only a couple of things like alcohol and benzos, right? If you just completely stop it, like those will kill you, right? Those
Right.
and so they were really upset about that. But they took me in. I ended up staying with my aunt and going to rehab at that time. And then this is where like I think the good part started to finally happen. We're getting there, right? Like it's um
Can I just
so
pause you right there for one
yeah, yeah.
second, Jake? Like,
Hmm.
first off, thank you for sharing that, man. That is a heart-wrenching story. But I think more than the adjective of heart-wrenching, I would say courageous. When you bring up this idea of the prodigal son, or when you talk about in the beginning of your story about going on your mission and then this idea of this thing eating at you and then you coming clean, like I see, and I'm sure you do looking back on it, like, how much courage it takes to be getting away with something and then be like, look, I gotta be honest with these people. Like you had this path in front of you. There's tons of people that had done what you did and never said anything. Maybe it
Yeah.
eats them up. Maybe they have a gremlin because of it. But I think it's important to note how strong you are to come clean in the face of authority and stand up of authority and say, I did this and I'm sorry. Like that takes so much courage to do. And I would venture to say that 99.9% of the people will never do that. And I think that that's a strength. And I think you could even correlate that with the strength that the church gave. Like they gave you faith as a
Mm-hmm.
kid. They may have done some things that you don't agree with, but they instilled in you a
Mm-hmm.
faith that allowed you to never give up on yourself. So I could see why you love them. So I just wanted to stop and interject that right there.
Mm-hmm.
But now we can take off. Thank you for sharing that, man. It's beautiful.
No, that actually means a lot too, because I still, I mean, looking back, I'm like, okay, that's cool, but not necessarily of like that connection of like, dude, no, that is actually really cool. Like
Yeah,
that's actually
like
like,
that's the foundation stone. Like there's a
hmm
famous quote that says, "The stone that the builder refused will always be the head cornerstone." And people that go through situations like this, there's you blew through your all your support systems. That can't have
hmm
that when you burn that bridge, burn that bridge.
yeah.
You know what I mean? And still, when you burned away everything, when you distilled Jake down to the very bare bones, now, only now can you build back something that can withstand the test of time. Only then is a hero born. Only once you go through the fires of hell, even if you don't believe in hell, once you go through these
hmm
fires, you're tempered. You've lost everything. What happens when you got nothing left to lose? Well, then you're
Yeah.
given the torch that can light the path to help other people, man. So carry on, my friend. Thank you
Yeah.
for doing
Oh,
that,
I
brother.
love it. I love it. No, I love it. Okay, so I'm in this second rehab, right? And during rehab, you do the 12 steps. And I had done the 12 steps. I was in the process of doing the 12 steps when I lived in the ward where I was the predator, right? And
Right.
you have step 4 is you write a moral inventory of yourself. And it is like it's like they want you to write everything, right? Like you're putting everything on the
Right.
table. And so it's very like you're in a very vulnerable state because then in step 5, they want you to read that to somebody. And so I'm like, okay, it makes sense. I'll read that to that bishop, right? Th- Third page in, I look up and he's falling asleep. And I was already not like wanting to do it. And
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, I was like, I'm done. And he's like, okay. I was like, yeah, I was like, I finished or whatnot. Um, I say that because at this rehab, I do step 4, right? I write everything else from the time that happened from that first rehab to
Yeah.
there. And then it's time to read it to somebody. And I asked my aunt if I could read it to her bishop, right? She said she had a bishop. She's like, he's really cool. I was like, okay. And so I was like, I'll read it to him. And that dude literally was on the edge of his seat, just like listening. Like it was like he cared. There was zero judgment, like zero judgment. And he was just like, oh my gosh, like tell me more. It's like acknowledging me, right? Validating me.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, like what is this? What is this guy? This is a bishop, right? Um, and so it was an amazing moment for me. Out of rehab, I went back to Price, and it just you have to move, right? You have to get out of that situation. But what during my time there, it was I started getting into drugs and everything again. But I had that thought. I'm like, dude, go ask Wendy, my aunt Wendy. I'm
Yeah.
like, ask her if I can. Like, I bet if I worked with that bishop, I bet I could get back in the church. I bet like
Yeah.
if I were to work for him. So I called her, and she's like, yes, come move with us, right? Like I'm literally selling drugs. It's like, hey, they know that I am, and they're like, they still were like, no, dude, like we know that you're trying.
Yeah.
Come and stay with us, right? So I worked with him, and it took a long time, but like he got me. He got my mind, right? It wasn't a specific rule like, okay, you broke that rule. So now it wasn't letter of the law with him. It was the
Right.
spirit of the law. And he
Right.
understood that. And it like now I'm like, why didn't it like can't you see somebody that's like, oh, I don't think anybody tried harder to live the gospel or even to believe in it than I did. It's like, but that was so impactful because it was like, okay, I know that you did something bad. He's like, when people do something bad, they're like right here. He's like, when you do something bad, you're like way down here. He's like, I'm not
Yeah.
telling you to minimize the sin,
Right.
right? I'm not telling you to minimize the sin. He's like, but you got to kind of minimize the sin, right? You kind of have to like, it's like, hey, I made a mistake.
Right.
So that really, really helped. I was able to get rebaptized. Um, a lot of people in my life that had helped me get to that point, you know, they they came and supported me. It was a
Yeah.
big moment, right? It was my
Yeah.
like, okay, I returned. Um, and like I was a little like I was excited about the return of like the gift of the Holy Ghost, right? Because that was something that I didn't have, right? Like that was something as an excommunicated person, like I didn't have that. And when I got baptized, I would get it again. And after I was baptized, like I didn't feel much different, right? Like I was, and it was probably a lot of expectations, but it was
Mm-hmm.
like what in the world? Like I don't feel that gift of the Holy Ghost. Like I don't feel any different. And it was like uh, I just thought, okay, like maybe you try to like make sense of it. Um, but anyways, I don't go back on drugs, right? I've got a good community. I start to do well at work. The scripture movies that I talked about as a
Yeah.
little kid, I ended up going and working at that company. So I start doing really well. I became one of the sales managers. Um, after some time on the phones, and then short while after that, I became the sales trainer, right? The lead trainer. Still doing managing, doing the training, and then they wanted to open up an office about like an hour and a half away, and so they had me go open that office, right? So I would drive about an hour and a half, like early in the morning. I'd go there. I did the hiring, the training, hopping on calls, doing a lot of those things, all of the admin work, and I would stay there till about like 8 at night and would drive back. But I loved it, right? I was coaching, I was like teaching, I had a lot of energy. It was awesome.
Yeah.
Playing a lot of ping pong, um, did a lot of those things. But then I just started getting like really tired, like really, really tired. I didn't know what was going on. I started like getting dizzy quite a bit. I'm just like, okay, obviously I'm working, I'm doing
Right.
a lot right now. So I just contributed it to that. I started getting like itchy legs. I had like some like dots were showing up on, like they look like pimples on my legs as well. And so it's kind of like weird things, Then I'd get a cold sore, and then when the cold sore would go away, one would come immediately back. I'm like, what in the heck's going on? Then it would go away, and then one morning I woke up with like three or four, like all over my lips, and I was like, all right, I should go get checked
Yeah.
and see what's wrong. Went in, got some blood work done. They sent me to the pharmacy to pick up some prescription. And before I got to the pharmacy, I got a call from that doctor and said she suggests that I go see an oncologist. They found some abnormalities um, in my white blood cell count.
Mm-hmm.
So I go. I'm dating my partner Kira, who I'm still with now at this time,
Yeah.
and we go and get my blood drawn. It was like 3 days or so after that. Like I got a phone call in the morning. I didn't recognize the number, so of course I didn't answer it. um, but then they called right back. I answered it. They said, hey, we've got your tests back. And they weren't going to test for cancer. They had said they were testing for like HIV, hepatitis, mono. And I was like, so we can rule cancer out. And they're like, well, yeah, I don't think it's a leukemia. But then the other doctor said something. He's like, okay, let's just order. It was called a blood flow
Okay.
chemistry test. So when I got there, they said we got the blow, like, so because I mean after that, like I was looking up all my symptoms and everything, and like the tests, and like I kind of thought, I was like, dude, I think I have leukemia. Right? Like I just kind of like
Yeah.
going through all of those things. I'm like, I feel like I have leukemia. And so we're like, no, right? Like we're going through all of like, if it were this, what are the survival rates
Mm.
and all of that. So there's some of the leukemias, because I was pretty sad. I was like, dude, I don't have HIV. I don't have hepatitis. It's like maybe mono. But I was like, I really think that. So we're going through those, and there's ALL, which has like it's like a 68% survival rate, 5 year survival rate, and we're like, okay, it's crap. Like, there's not going to be any good diagnosis. I was
Right.
like, okay, but
Right.
it's like better than 50%. Then we saw AML, and it said 27% chance survival rate. So I try to hurry and flick up. like pretty
Yeah.
quickly.
Yeah.
And Kira stops it and looks at it. I'm like, I probably don't have that one, right? Like
Let's not look at that one.
that's not the one that I have. So we get that call and they're like, we need you to come up. We got your results back. And I was like, okay, if it was like
Mm,
just mono or something, they probably would have told us in that case
right.
to go up there. So we take the hour drive up. We're pretty scared. She's 20, I believe, at
Okay.
19, 20 at this time. We'd only been dating for a few months. And we get there, they sit us down, and my younger sister had lymphoma, and they had known about
Mm,
that. And the doctor sits us down, and I don't know what it is, but doctors like just they just they let it like give it straight to you, right? Where it was, Jake, your results came back, the blood flow synastry, and I was like, oh my gosh. So I kind of knew what it was, and he's like, and you have leukemia. He's like, I know that your sister had lymphoma. This is nothing like it. It's like, this is an aggressive cancer. We're going to have to treat it aggressively. And you'll have to start treatment tomorrow. And so, like, at that point, I don't know if you've seen like on movies or whatnot, but like everything just was quiet, except for in the distance of like the one, one, right, them saying that. And I'm just like, in my head, I'm like, I was like, what the hell did he just say? Like, and like Kira was crying, but I couldn't understand. And they tried to give me the phone. They tried to give me the phone to talk to the hospital to give me some instructions of like, what to expect. And I had to give it back. I'm like, can you guys email it to me? It's like, I can't understand what's going on.
right.
And finally we get up to leave. And when we leave, I see everybody in the office and they're looking at me. And I'm like, man, I wonder, I'm like, do they know what I just got told? Right? Like, do they know that I just got told I got cancer? So I'm not crying at this point because I'm still kind of stunned. We get to my car. As soon as we close the door, we just cry, right? Just fall together. I tried to call my mom, and this is another thing of like, oh great, I'm calling my mom
Yeah, right.
for something something crappy again. And she answered. She's like, hello, and I'm like, I couldn't say anything. Like I'm trying to, but I can't get it out. She's like Jake, are you
Uh-huh.
there? And I'm just like, it's like I have leukemia, and I just started bawling again.
Mm,
Couldn't talk. And on the way home, I was like trying to like hype myself up, like, dude, okay, like you've gone through a lot, like
yeah.
you overcame addiction, like you can do this. But then it was immediately like angry of like, dude, I overcame addiction. Like, why do I have to do this? Like, so
Yeah.
I was like, like that battle of like, man, like, I mean, but I didn't really have time. It's just like, hey, the next day's here.
Yep.
Here's your treatment. So the regimen was, the first week, I think it was like 5 different types of chemo, but it was a 24/7. Right? Like, so I was getting pumped with chemo 24 hours
Oh.
a day for a full week.
Oh.
After that, they had said it's like a 60 to 70%, like people will usually get in remission after that first round, but mine didn't. And so they had to do another round, so another week, right? So I was there about two months that first time, and because of that is when they, you know, requested, like, suggested that I do a bone marrow transplant. And I was like, all right, I didn't really know, but you have to go in and like before you agree to it, like they have to sit you down and explain everything and like what it entails. So we went into this big conference room. My parents weren't able to come up, so they like FaceTimed in. And the doctor, Dr. Ash, she was brilliant. I had the greatest cancer doctors. But she sits down and she's like, we want to make sure that you understand what you're going to be going through. And she said that they're going to have to use, I think it was 3 or maybe it was 5 or something. It was like 3 high dose chemotherapy drugs within like 3 days. She's like, we're going to have to take it to the brink of death before we can put in, those other stem cells to give you a chance at life again. And when she said the brink of death, I was like, whoa. I'm like, what? Right? Like, 'cause I was
That's
feeling,
so crazy. We're gonna
like,
have
I
to
was
almost kill
feeling,
you, Jake.
yeah, it's like,
Just so you know, we're gonna do. That's so
I know,
crazy.
just so you know, we're
Yeah.
gonna try to kill you.
He's like, "Ass,
Oh,
people have been trying to do that my whole life."
that's it, right? So I was like, okay, like, so they start talking about it, and like at the end, I'm like, all right. I was like, what if I? Because I was feeling good, right? Like I started
Mhm.
to kind of recover from the 2 weeks off.
Okay.
I got to go home for Christmas, and they're like, well, if you don't do it, we feel there's around like a 75-80% chance it comes back. But if you do, feel like maybe it's more of like a 25% chance.
Mm,
It's like, all right, don't really have a choice, right?
mm.
So um, we look for a donor in the registry, and I don't have a match. I don't have a match in the stem cell registry. So they started the thing where they test your family members.
Mm,
This is where my big family comes into play, right? Where
right.
I ended up having two sisters who were half matches to me that they just recently started to do half match transplants, right? Like that was it was a thing that they had been seeing a lot of success with. One of my sisters was pregnant, so my youngest sister, she ended up being the match that we used. So they take me to the brink of death, destroy all the cells, and then they transplant hers in. Science is amazing. I saw that you had, that the stem cell research guest just barely, where it was like my blood type changed. I have female DNA. I have a completely new immune system. It's 7 years old. My sister, like, I'd always joke, I'm like, dude, I'm gonna go rob a bank. I'll cut myself, leave your blood there. You get in trouble. And she's just like, well, I'll just tell him, like, look at me and look at you, and then like see who do they think it did it. And
I
so,
love her already.
but it's just crazy because it's like, man. But after that, like those next 2 weeks, it was fevers of 105, like just constantly. So I was going delirious. Like that, the second half of my stay, the bone marrow transplant, was by far like the most difficult part. And the whole time, Kira is right there, staying at the hospital every night. Just she's scared to death because we don't know what's going on. I kept having
Yeah.
like everything kept going wrong too, right? I was having all these complications. I was having allergic reactions, right? Like coding, going to anaphylactic shock and like scary, scary stuff. And she's there that entire time, at least. And this is where the caregiver side comes in for me of like my family went through
Right.
it with my addiction. Kira went through it. I was getting all of the attention, like
Mm,
all of the attention. Jake needs the help. Jake, but they're going through it. And so that's kind of where I felt a lot of understanding on that side of like, oh my gosh, I was just trying to like stay awake, right? Like I'm not really experiencing like what they are. So after that though, I have to stay with the caregiver 24/7. Kira's my caregiver. Couldn't leave the house. And during this time, this is when I just read. I read a lot.
mm,
I started reading. I found it's called a CES letter. It's a letter that somebody did that was part of the church that had written to one of the leaders asking a bunch of questions about church history. And when I started reading it, and they're like we're taught not to look at any literature outside of the church because it's considered anti-Mormon literature.
mhm.
And so if you read something, you have to make sure that it's church approved,
Okay.
right? To make sure that it's like legit. So I had known that, and I'm reading this stuff, and it was things that I had no idea about. There was like, I'd been a member for my entire life, and none of that stuff was being talked about. And some of the things about like Joseph Smith and like polygamy and
Mm,
things that it was just like, no, that didn't happen. But it was at a time when they call it like the Joseph Smith papers came out, like the church actually
mhm.
had those came out with that information there, right? With the internet, it's kind of hard to hide things.
Right.
And so because of that, that's kind of when that came out. And so then it was like confirming, I'm like, wait a minute, like, why wasn't I told that, right? Like, people would get upset that, he translated the scriptures out of a hat. They didn't teach us that like, growing up. We were taught that he translated the Book of Mormon, through the plates. And I'm like, in my head, I wasn't like, that's weird, because I'm like, dude, just the thought of like God appearing to him and him translating that, I was like, that's pretty intense. Like, that's really out there. Like, why didn't they just tell me the real
Right.
story? Because
Yeah.
that faith and that belief would have still been there. And then it was just really on like, and I won't go in like too much detail, but it was something that had happened with Joseph and his wife that was like, I just lost all trust,
Mm.
like all trust. Like I felt betrayed. I felt I felt sick to my stomach because it didn't make sense why we weren't telling this stuff. Like, what are we hiding? And then, like trust is just, once that's gone. But George, all of that stuff leading up to that, like, it was not like my faith crisis that I had experienced at this time was by far harder than all of that, because I just spent 11 years trying to get back to the church,
Yeah.
right? Like, and to read it, and like then to find out that it was true, and asking questions, like we're taught to doubt the doubts, like before you doubt the church, doubt your doubts. And so like there's just that battle of like, what is going on? But during this time, Kira, who is, man, she's like the most spiritual person ever without even realizing it. She's always like 10 steps ahead, but like she was having these lucid dreams that she was trying to make sense of. And she brought home a book, Ayahuasca, Soul Medicine of the Amazon Jungle, Javier Reguero, like just randomly, right? So we start reading that, and it's talking about the healing power of ayahuasca, and like how it was healing people with addiction and like, like depression and like all of the amazing things. And I was like, what is going on? Because one of the hardest things for me was the loss of spirituality, right? If the church wasn't true, why was I getting answers to my prayers? If the church wasn't true, why would I be praying for something and find answers in the scriptures? Who do I pray to? Who am I praying to now? Like, I don't. And that was such a huge part, like such a huge part. And learning about these things, obviously we weren't able to go to Peru and have an ayahuasca experience, but it was planting the seed, right? It
Right.
planted the seed to have that idea that there are some things that actually can help with that. And then it got to the point where I had, my experience with psilocybin, that, and I had done it when I was, recreationally, and
Sure.
it was like cool. I had never done it in a like with intent. I never did it
Mm. So true.
with anything besides, like, I wanted to do what it was telling me it could do, right? I wanted it to, like, this is from the earth. Like, this is something that's connecting. And I'm like, I want to do it that way. And it's crazy because I did try it, and I had a really like healing experience, and connecting. But it wasn't until just barely working with Amanda, realizing that I had trauma within myself that was just eating me up. And it was about a month and a half or 2 months ago that I decided, I was like, I'm going to do a hero dose. I'm going to sit in my room. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to have the intention. I want to connect. I want to go. I want to give up, not give up. I want to release. I want to
Yeah.
say, hey, take me. I know that this is a thing. And it was amazing because I visited I like, I saw myself in front of everybody that meant a lot to me, all of my family members, as if I was right there in the room. We, there was not like, it was just we looked at each other and there was no words, right? No words at all being spoken. But man, they understood me so. I cannot tell you of like how much, because all I wanted them to know was like, I'm not a bad person. Like, I didn't leave the church because I couldn't live its teachings, or I wanted to go a different way. Like I wanted them to know how much pain I was feeling, right?
Yeah.
And it got to a point where it was like, we understand you. Like it was my mom and grandma that I specifically remember. And those two had both, they've talked about like they've never questioned the church, right? They've never had doubts,
Yeah.
right? And so it was when I was like, it kind of peeled everything off of like, I didn't see my Mormon mom. I didn't see my Mormon grandma. I didn't see my earthly mom. I didn't see my earthly grandma. Like my divine light within me was speaking and connecting to their divine light in them, right? And it was me. They were me. I was them, right? It was that connection of
Yep.
like, dude,
Yeah.
you don't like you don't need to ask us for forgiveness, right? Right? Like it was they were seeing me as me. They completely understood, and I just started to bawl, right? I
Yeah.
cried harder than I had ever cried in my life, longer than I had ever cried. And when I had come out, it was like all of that shame and guilt was just like it was a lifetime worth of therapy of like it was
Yeah.
understanding. I came out with a thought of connection that I had never thought of before. I was so excited because that was the most spiritual because I understood myself, right? Dr. Gabor Mate talks about like that's part of trauma is the loss of self, right?
Hmm.
And that loss of self, when they talk about addiction, the opposite of addiction, it's not sobriety, it's connection, right? And so those things are all coming together, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like that plant, it's I mean you've done it. It's so hard to put into words of like how
Yeah.
strong that feeling was, how much that changed in my mind, how much of a like, oh my gosh, like everybody's the same as me, no matter what anybody else does, right? Like that's
Yeah.
just their ego them. They're the other person, like the divine light in them, right? I feel like when we leave this earth, whatever, we connect back to the those divine lights and like people that had made like that we needed to make amends with. It's just like, no, man, that was like that was my earth life. This is, this is that
Yeah.
pure and perfect life. And that was so beautiful. And that's like I said, it was just just happened. I found out that people actually do like integration coaching because the thing is it's like you okay, you have that experience. Now what do you do with it?
Hmm.
Everything was aligning up with I've already been doing with coaching. Coaching, you're not telling people what to do, right? Coaching is not giving advice, it's empowering somebody to find that light in them, right? It's empowering
Yeah.
them. It's, the patterns. It's like we only think one way, right? We think of the way that we perceive things. A coach is there to help ask those other questions, like what other options might there be, right? Because there's
Yeah.
tons of different options, and when we're able to find out who we are, like that's literally when that purpose comes in. We have so many people that don't have purpose because we're disconnected from who we are, and that's that powerful part of like, dude, if you can help people, these plant medicines help people do that, then it's like, okay, now like what's better to have somebody by your side, completely no judgment. You make a mistake, dude, cool. What happened? Let's dig a little bit deeper because maybe that wasn't the goal that we should have went after, right? Like maybe it was something else. And so it's like, oh man, I feel safe to be myself. I feel safe to be vulnerable. Be having the vulnerability, that's it's Latin word for to wound, right? Right? So it makes us to be vulnerable and we heal from those wounds. And I just got so excited about all of this and finding out there's coaching. And I'm like, I don't know anything about it. So I'm just going to reach out to everybody that I started adding everybody on LinkedIn, reaching out. I talked to Kristen. She connected me to you, connected me to Rand Hansen, who I know, or uh,
Right.
yeah, who you've had on
Phenomenal
here.
individual.
Yeah. And I'm just like, this is the greatest thing I've ever found. And I don't know. I'm just stepping into this community, but it's like find your tribe, right? We all have a tribe. Not everybody's going to get excited about things for you, but like that's not your tribe. But if you're not like yourself, how are you going to find your people, right?
So well said.
So that's kind of. I mean, I know it was long. It was crazy, but man, that's why I'm so grateful to have found you, listening to your podcast, like the work, the studies that is done. So now it's like, dude, this it shouldn't even be put in the same category as a drug, right? Like let's completely change our mind
Right.
because we struggle with we have a mental health crisis, we have an opioid crisis, but we have medicine that helps with that, George. Like we
Yes.
legit have something that helps, that's safe, that's something that's connected, that inspires people to look outside of their own patterns. Like that is exciting. And that's why I was like, once I started watching your stuff, I was so like, I'm honored to be here because I'm like, dude, this is what I want to do. So I'm not there yet. The coaching is that, but like, man, I'm just I'm just excited, with the possibilities, honestly.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of mythology. I'm a big fan of spirituality. And the older I get, the more things that happened in my life make sense to me. And they begin to line up in ways that you never thought possible. And the truth is, you have a story that is written in the stars, not in the sand. And the truth is, if I came to you and said, "Hey, Jake, I want you to become one of the greatest teachers possible out there. But in order to do that, I'm going to rip everything from you. I'm going to tear away your spirituality. I'm going to tear away your family. I'm going to make them hate you." You'd be like, "Get the hell out of here, you weirdo. I don't want any of that." No, it's going to be great. You're going to smoke a bunch of meth. You're going to walk around town like a crackhead. It's going to be awesome. You'd be like, "Dude, I want no part of this."
Hmm.
And I think this is my belief. And I honestly believe that this place we're at is a spiritual classroom, and people are given opportunities to be here, and maybe it's a pact that happens before we come here. I don't thoroughly understand how we get here, but I know without a doubt, by reading mythology, by talking to people like Rick Strassman, by talking to people like Dr. Jessica, that it's bigger than we can imagine. And all these things that happen to us, especially the traumatic events, are lessons that we're being taught so that later in life we can become the teacher of those lessons. And none of us would choose to go through trauma. None of us would choose to have these things happen to us. But it's like this tempering fire that you're forced to walk through so that you can become your authentic self. And I love you, man. I'm so
Yeah.
thankful that you're able to share these stories, because only and don't get me wrong, I think that modern medicine has done so much for people, and it's
Hmm.
gotten to this point where we are now. And I'm so thankful that there's beautiful doctors out there that give their lives to help people. But I think what we're seeing emerge now is this sort of second pillar. We're reintroducing spirituality to medicine. And I think the people that can best help people in trauma are people that have been through those traumas themselves. And in modern medicine today, the guy that gave you those Suboxone, or the guy that gives you methadone, that guy didn't take methadone. He knows, he probably cares a lot about people, and he knows what the pharmaceutical companies have told him it does. And he's read the studies, but he hasn't been on it. He hasn't been on the adventure. And so if there's a young Jake or a young George or a young Kristen out there, or there's someone that's suffering, the person that can really help them the most is the person that has walked down that road. And in a weird way, when you think about hiking, there, new trails are sometimes created. Those are called trailblazers, Jake, and that's what you are, my friend. I love you. I'm so stoked that you've had the courage to do it. I'm so stoked that your parents opened you back with open arms when times were tough. I'm so stoked about your aunt. I'm so stoked that the teachers were there when the real teachers showed up when you needed them. And the
Hmm.
ones that may not have been real teachers were maybe falling asleep when you were trying to ask for help. And like, those are all lessons that you're going to carry with you forever. When
Yeah.
some kid comes to you and you sit on the edge of your seat, and that kid
Yeah.
sees in you the
Yeah.
light, like those are all gifts,
Ah.
my friend. They're all
Hmm.
gifts. And it's no, like, I get it. I get why Kristen was like, "George, this is the guy. George, listen, this is the guy. Go talk to him." I get it now. And I'm thankful for that. Uh, so if we just move on a little bit from there, like, how do you think you can use some of these tools, some of these lessons that you were taught to help other people?
Yeah. So I love that you had brought all those up too, because like Greek mythology, the figure Chiron, I like he's in astrology, he's known as the wounded healer,
Mhm.
right? And I just resonated with him from the moment I heard about him, right? Because it was like, then there's this quote that I had actually written down. It's like, only when we have descended into the depths of our own shadows can we show up fully for someone else as they navigate their own darkness.
Right.
Like that's what I want to do, George. Like that's
I
what
know.
I want to be there when, like, like I wouldn't say I'm comfortable there, but like I know that like I'm not afraid to go down there. And
I
that's
know.
where that like the psychedelic experience of like, no, I'm going to come at this curious, right? And I think that's what I want to do is I want to be able to give someone the safe space to be authentic, right? Like the greatest enjoyment I feel like in life would just be to be able to express our true selves in whatever we do. That's what I keep telling Kira. I'm like, dude, I want to be the same person in I want to be weird. I want to be like laugh. I want to do that. Like I don't want to have that mask of wherever I'm at. And what I want to do is, and what I do get to do, and that's what the cool part about with coaching, right?
Yeah.
Is you're offering that safe spot because it's difficult to navigate through this life. And a coach is just a
Yeah.
partner, right? A
Right.
coach is I had done it my entire life, but I didn't have different skills, like coaching skills. Like that's why I went to go get trained. That's why I went to do those things. And it's so exciting because then you partner with that other person, right? And regardless of what it is,
Yeah.
right? I know that I'm going to be able to relate to, people going through cancer, addiction, depression, faith crisis, all of those things. But everybody struggles. Everybody has a difficult time connecting with themselves to be their true authentic self. And I know that there's a ton of coach, a lot of life coaches out there, right? A lot of life
Yeah. Of
coaches, a
course.
lot of life gurus. I'm not looking to be a guru. I'm not looking to do any of that. Like I keep thinking, I'm like, there's no way I went through all that I went through just
Mhm.
to like not do anything with it, right?
Right.
And so it's just like, what am I waiting for? Instead of a fear of like, because sometimes I would go like, okay, I shouldn't be afraid because I went through cancer. But that was still like a fear. Like, okay, like I shouldn't be afraid because now I know who I am,
Yeah.
right? And that's what that power of coaching, that's what that power of mentoring, that's what that power comes
Yes.
from, of like, hey, let's figure out who you are, and then let's put together a plan. Let's put together an accountability system because if you get all these good ideas, it's like you could go to a conference and then be like, oh, that was awesome, or have that psychedelic experience, but then you do nothing with it and you
Right.
lose that. That's why that coach is
Right.
there to help, like, hey, how'd you do? And like I said, it's completely judgment free, which is a huge thing because I didn't like getting in trouble, right? And sometimes you think like, oh man, I'm going to be held accountable, but the cool thing is it's not that way. And so it's exciting to have those. And that's where I feel like my experience coming from where I've been, like I know that I'll be able to speak to people, right? I'll have
Yeah.
those speaking engagements and do that, like, motivation on that side. But I don't want my story to take over any of like the truth, right? Because
Right.
when I die, that's just my story. And some people could be like, well, he did it, but like he's kind of an anomaly. But it's not, right? Like there are true principles,
Right.
right? There are universal truths and there are things that we can do, and everybody has the ability to connect with themselves. And so that's where that power is of like, okay, I'm going to dedicate my life to try to help people connect with themselves because then once we can do that, then all right, now let's tackle what do you want to do? Right? What are your core values? Are we living with that? Because when we're not in our core values, like, man, that disconnect, we can feel that we're pushed aside to,
Yeah.
back and forth. So like that's the thing. It's like, okay, what goals can we set? What questions can we ask ourselves? Like I said before I got on
That's a
here,
great one.
yeah, before I even got on here, I was nervous, but then I have the disciplines. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, be aware. Am I aware? Am I accepting? What kind of conscious choice am I making? Like, is that even true of what I'm thinking? And I went down those things. I'm like, dude, I'm thinking of like this to be successful, this has to be the result. A mastery mindset is I'm guaranteed to succeed because I'm going in and I'm going to learn something.
Yeah.
Results aren't going to be a part of that. And I know that's kind of hard for a lot of people. It's like, I want results, right? And that's kind of the idea, but it's like, that's not how life works. That is not how life works because those results,
Right.
like those, we don't have any control over that. right?
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of teaching of like that. How do we think that way? That it's the process. How do we think about what values are important to us? Because then when everybody else is talking, it's like, dude, you can feel really good because you stuck to your values. Vulnerability is a big value of mine, right? And literally, that's what I kept saying. I'm like, I'm being true to that
Yeah.
value, and so after we get off, I'm going to sit. And I hadn't done this for a long time, but I'm going to sit with myself, and I'm going to be proud of myself,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge part of the growth, and I think everybody needs to do that. And that's where I see that my um, life experiences can really resonate on that level.
Yeah, I've been speaking with a lot of people, and it seems to me, and I'm curious to get your opinion on this. I see this world emerging where the way we make the world better is by each individual becoming the best version of themselves. And when you do that, when you become the best version of yourself,
Hmm.
Adam Tapp had a great quote. He says, "Look, George, when you become the best version of yourself, it's like there's this giant bucket of murky water, and every person that becomes the best version of themselves is a drop of bleach. And every little drop of bleach goes into that murky water. And all of a sudden, it's contagious. And the
Hmm.
bleach comes out, and then all of a sudden it starts clearing up. That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is every time you become every one of us is like a pebble and when we become the best version of ourselves, we're thrown into the pond like this pure pebble, and then those little ripples radiate outwards, and it catches people and it moves them into the world of becoming the best version of themselves. And I think that when you do distill yourself down to what is important, and what's important to me, what is the best version of myself isn't the best version of you. What's the best version of you isn't the best version of Kristen. And but all of us together becoming the best version of ourselves is like, I feel like we're on the front lines of helping people, and it's so rewarding. And when you say you're going to sit with yourself and be proud of the story you told and being vulnerable and being true to yourself, like, it's so powerful, man. And I'm so thankful that you're out there and doing the things you're doing and reaching out to people. And I think people are responding. I mean, I see
Hmm.
people, you're the podcast blowing up. I see the connections you're making. I don't think you would be even connected to the people you were unless you would become the person you are. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. One thing I've always thought too of, like, we do worry about the exterior things, when you've got politics and things like that. It's
Yeah.
like, how do we, it's like we make ourselves better because there's influence, right? We
Right.
influence people. And when
Yeah.
we're the best version of ourselves, Kobe Bryant was asked like what his definition of greatness was, right? And he
Yeah.
talked about, the ability to inspire somebody who will then inspire somebody else, right? And so when he
Yeah.
leaves, like, he's inspiring somebody to be better. And what that does, it's not an arrogant better. It's like, oh, I'm inspiring to be better. So guess what I'm going to do, right?
Yeah.
That's where it is. It's a collective. But that's also too, when you peel back the egos, we're that same, like, I am you, you are me. That's
Yeah.
those connections. Like, that's what it's about. Is our tribe, is our connecting. And so when you do improve yourself, you're opening up that connection and you are influencing people. You're spot on. You're spot on with that.
Yeah, it's I'm so fascinated to hear about that experience that you had where, you see the connections. And for me too, some of the biggest mind altering, mind expanding, growth allowing experiences were this idea that, oh my God, I am them. Everything I
Yeah.
see in them, everything I see in them, like the
Yeah.
good things, the bad things, and like that's scary for me. That was really scary for me when I realized these things that I hated about other people. I didn't hate those other people or those things. I hated those things about me.
Hmm.
And then I was like, oh my God, they're showing me what I hate
Yeah.
about myself.
Yeah.
Whoa. And then you got to go and apologize to people for being a kind
Mhm.
of a punk. But that's part of it too. It's like, hey man, thank you for showing me this thing about myself that I'm lacking in, man. And I'm trying
Mhm.
to work on it. I just want to say sorry for projecting it on you. And, like it on some level, you're like, oh, that's it. And then you realize the amount of work you have to do now.
I know. That's one of the funny, like, that was a hard lesson because they taught about that in my coaching course. It's like higher conscious understanding, whatever. It's like what we see in them, we also have in us. And
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
no, but you think about like serial killers, it's like, I don't have that in me or anything. but then like as you do the coaching and like you'll have these moments come up and you ask, it's like, hey, like, what is it in them is
Yeah.
bothering you? And then when do you show that quality within yourself? And then you're like, oh my gosh. And then it's like it's a self-compassion too, though,
Yeah.
right? Because it's like,
It
oh,
is.
I do that, I'm sorry. But it's like, dude, okay, like let's work on that. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's so
that's
awesome,
funny.
man. I'm really excited, man. I got to tell you that I wasn't sure what your story was exactly, but it's one of the best stories that I have ever heard, and I'm so thankful that you got to share it here with me, and I'm thankful for your time. And before I let you go, though, Jake, what do you have coming up, and where can people find you, and what are you excited about?
Yeah, so I am right now. You can find me. I'm working on my website still,
Okay.
so you can find me on LinkedIn. I do have a Facebook, but it's just kind of a personal one. So LinkedIn
Okay.
would be the best.
Okay.
And we could put these in the show notes and whatnot.
Absolutely.
But we, people can feel free to have an like connection call, right? Just to kind of
Yeah.
see if this is something that they like that we would work well together, right? If they want to get
Right.
coached, it's kind of a let's see if there's synergy there. So they could reach out to coaching at lifebeyondthebrink.com. Email me there. But again, that's where you can find me. As far as like what I'm excited for, then I am just excited to be growing my not my
Yeah.
network, but my connections, right?
Right.
Growing my coaching business, my coaching practice, speaking engagements. So I'm really excited about that. I'm
Mhm.
working really hard on getting all of those things together, and um, yeah, I'm just gonna keep connecting with people, keep curious.
Yeah.
So I love the community that you have welcomed me into, and I'm here to stay.
Yeah, without a doubt, you're a huge part of it, man, and I'm really thankful. So for everybody watching, check out the link down there. Reach out to Jake if you found that his story connected with you and you want to reach out to him. Reach out to him. He's listening to people. He's doing connect calls. I highly recommend it because I think that anybody listening to this can see the passion in his eyes, and he's a passionate person. But more than that, he wants to make you and himself have a better connection in the world better. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to us. That's all we got for today. Jake, hang on one second. I'm going to close out, but I want to talk to you.
Cool.
Aloha, everybody.